We want to briefly pivot to the topic of climate change. And here's the outline. Everybody understands climate change in terms of the history of the Earth. The climate has been changing, that's undeniable. Most of North America was covered in glaciation, so we're aware of these massive changes in the climate over time. The question, and again, we don't want to talk about any, we're not here to talk about any bullshit politics, any bullshit political agendas. We're just looking at the pure science. So, and as it relates to Lake Mead, this is our own opinion. First of all, taking the lake itself, if you consider it basically an artificial construct with the construction of a dam, it's not necessarily the best measure. Lake Mead, the water level of Lake Mead alone is not necessarily the gauge of whether the climate is changing. Well, the climate is always changing since the beginning of time, but for the purposes of the debate, what we're talking about is the debate whether or not human beings are having a factor on either accelerating the climate change or perhaps even human activity is deferring an ice age. So what's the human impact in all of this since the industrial age, whatever. Okay, so the Lake Mead itself, our opinion of it has been that perhaps it's increasing population, perhaps it's overuse, maybe it's mismanagement, who knows? The lack of coordination, who knows? What would be interesting to know if the climate, so there's two levels. So if the climate is changing, that's one thing to accept. Then it would then pivot to, do human beings have a impact on the climate change? What if the climate is changing and it's due to some type of transmillennial cycle? Basically, is the climate changing on its own, or are human beings having some type of major decisive impact by what people do? So this is where it gets complicated, because everyone's familiar with the politics. Is the climate changing? And if the climate is going through a cycle, is it by nature alone? But so first of all, on whether the climate is changing, whether climate change is happening on a dramatic scale without addressing the question of what degree of human involvement. It would be interesting to know if glaciation across, for example, the Rocky Mountains. We don't want to take a look at Lake Mead. We want to go upstream to the source. Over the last 30, 40 years, has there been a measurable reduction in whatever you want to go, ice cap accumulation, basically the water melt, the accumulation of ice on the Rockies, or upstream, downstream, very easy concepts, right? So if there's less snow cap accumulation over time, that would be a factor. So we don't want to just look at what's happening Lake Mead. We wanted to see if not only the Rocky Mountains, Colorado River, if you're seeing an across-the-board reduction in snowfall, ice cap accumulation, and whether this is or is not corroborated in other places. For example, is there a melting of glaciation? Is there a loss of glaciation across the Himalayas? So across different parts of the world simultaneously. And if the global temperatures are rising, if there's a reduction in major rivers, so the Himalayas feed off into major river systems, massive river systems. So if across the board, the question is there a change? Is there an observable change across the board? So if there's an observable change across the board, that would seem to support the climate is changing. Then the question, that's a big pivot, and we don't want to hear any bullshit politics. What degree if it's changing across the board, what degree do scientists believe that human beings are contributing it to it? So what if the climate is changing due to its own cycle? For example, we're just making it up. For example, what if, for example, every 10,000 years, every 12,000 years, uh, there's a natural, some type of natural geothermal cycle, some type of ice age, or the opposite of an ice age? To what degree can this all be ascribed to natural sources if you're observing climate change? And to what degree would the human impact, what you call carbon emissions, would have on all of this? So we want to look at it scientifically. We don't want to hear any politics. We want to understand the consensus of the scientific community without any politics, without any agenda. We want to look at the source, upstream, very objective, scientific. That's our only 2 cents on this matter. So the climate, it could be changing. For billions and billions of years, the climate is changing. The climate could be going through a phase. And are humans contributing to this phase? We're not. And to what degree? So this is where it breaks down into incoherence.